All right, let's talk about unlocking a key step for getting into one of the world's fastest growing markets. Today, we're breaking down the BIS Compulsory Registration Scheme, which you'll also hear called Scheme 2. Look, if you're planning to launch a product in India, you absolutely have to get this right. So, let's dive in.
So, you've got your eyes on India, a massive, dynamic market. It's a fantastic goal. But before you can get your product on the shelves, there's a really important regulatory hurdle you've got to clear. And honestly, understanding this process can be the difference between a smooth launch and a bunch of frustrating, costly delays.
And the gatekeeper for that hurdle is this organization right here, the Bureau of Indian Standards, or BIS for short. Think of them as India's national standards body. They're the ones responsible for making sure products sold in the country are safe, reliable, and high quality. Basically, they set the bar for what's allowed in.
Okay, so BIS has a couple of different ways to get products certified, but we're going to zero in on one specific route, a more modern one that's really designed for speed. Let's get into the details of what's known as Scheme 2, the Compulsory Registration Scheme, or CRS.
The best way to really get a handle on Scheme 2 is to see how it stacks up against the more traditional way, Scheme 1. The old model, Scheme 1, involved hands-on factory inspections, BIS officials coming on-site to do audits. As you can imagine, that was a pretty slow, intensive process. Scheme 2, on the other hand, is the modernized version. It's faster, it's more streamlined, and it's all built around something called self-declaration, which means no more official factory visits from BIS.
And yeah, this visual pretty much nails the core difference. Scheme I is all about that official in-person inspection. But Scheme 2, it flips the script. Its whole efficiency comes from you, the manufacturer, taking the responsibility and formally declaring that your product is up to standard.
So, what is this self-declaration thing anyway? Well, think of it as a formal, legally binding promise you make to BIS. You are officially putting it on record that your product has been tested and that it meets all the required Indian standards. This puts the accountability for compliance right on your shoulders.
And what's great is that all the features of Scheme 2 really work together to get you to market faster. The whole process is streamlined because it relies on lab tests instead of long, drawn-out audits. Naturally, that leads to a much shorter timeline. And once you're registered, your product gets to display a distinctive BIS mark, which is a powerful signal of compliance for both consumers and regulators.
So you might be wondering, if it's all based on a self-declaration, how does BIS make sure it's all legitimate? Well, the answer is independent, accredited labs. These third-party labs are the ones who provide the objective, verifiable proof that your product actually does what you say it does. That lab report is the critical piece of evidence that backs up your entire claim.
Okay, we've got the what and the why down pat. Now for the really practical part, the how. We're going to walk through the entire registration journey step by step so you know exactly what to do and what to expect. Before we dive into the nitty-gritty, let's just take a high-level look at the whole flow. It's a pretty logical path, right? It starts at your factory, moves through testing and documentation, and ends with that final certification from BIS. So now let's break down each one of those stages.
All right, here's the core game plan, broken down into 5 key steps. Everything kicks off online on the official BIS portal. That's where you'll submit your application and pay the fees. Then comes what I think is the most critical phase, document scrutiny. BIS officials are going to go through every single document with a fine-tooth comb. It's pretty common for them to have questions, and you'll need to answer those right there on the portal. Once every question is answered and everything's in order, you get to the final step, the grant of your license.
And speaking of documents, here are the absolute must-haves. You're going to need that application form, all filled out and signed. You'll need that critical test report from a BIS-recognized lab. And you'll need the affidavit, which is your formal self-declaration. Oh, and here's a pro tip. Really pay close attention to the product-specific checklists from BIS. The requirements can change quite a bit depending on what you're trying to register.
Okay, I really can't stress this enough. The number one single biggest reason for delays in this whole process is incomplete or inaccurate paperwork. It is so important to double-check, even triple-check, every single thing. Make sure your lab reports are up to date and that every form is filled out perfectly. I promise you, getting this right the first time will save you weeks, maybe even months of painful back and forth.
All right, now for all of you watching from outside India, listen up because this part is absolutely critical for you. If you don't have a physical branch office in India, you are required by law to appoint what's called an Authorized Indian Representative, or AI. This can be a person or a company, and they act as your official go-between with BIS. They handle all the communication and compliance stuff. And just to be crystal clear, this isn't optional, it is 100% mandatory.
So, you did it. You navigated the whole process, and you have your license. That is a huge win. But, and you knew there was a but, right? The work isn't quite over. See, getting registered is just the first major step. The next ongoing challenge is staying compliant.
So your initial registration is good for 2 years. To keep it active, you've got to renew it. You can stick with that 2-year cycle, or you can actually opt for a longer renewal period, up to 5 years. The key thing here is just to be proactive about it. Letting a license expire while your product is still for sale in India, well, that can lead to some pretty serious problems.
And this right here is exactly why staying compliant matters so much. BIS doesn't just hand you a license and then disappear, not at all. They are actively monitoring products that are already out there in the marketplace. It's a continuous cycle of surveillance, and their goal is to make sure that the products being sold today are just as good as the ones you sent in for testing.
So how does this market surveillance work in the real world? Well, BIS officials have the authority to go out and collect samples of your product. Literally, they can pull it right off a retail shelf, grab it from a warehouse, or even stop it while it's in transit. They'll send those samples off for testing, and if a product fails, the consequences are pretty severe. We're talking everything from big fines to having your registration canceled completely.
Now let's talk about the legal backbone that makes this registration mandatory in the first place. It all comes down to something called Quality Control Orders, or QCOs. The easiest way to think of a QCO is as a government directive that lists specific products that absolutely must have BIS registration to be sold in India. Right now, there are 6 of these key orders that apply to Scheme 2. And those 6 orders, well, they cover a surprisingly wide range of products. All told, they make registration mandatory for 74 different product categories. And that's everything from certain electronics and IT gear to specific kinds of lights and batteries. The list is always growing, so it's so important to check if your product is on a QCO list. If it is, registration isn't just a good idea, it's the law.
Whew! We have covered a ton of ground. So to wrap things up, let's boil all of this down into a final, simple checklist for success. These are the absolute must-dos to get you through the process smoothly.
Okay, here it is. First, confirm if your product is on one of those mandatory quality control order lists. Second, choose a credible BIS-accredited lab for your testing. Third, be obsessive about your documentation. Make sure it's 100% accurate. Fourth, if you're a foreign manufacturer, get your AIR appointed early on. Fifth, put those license renewal dates on your calendar. And finally, always maintain your product quality, because you have to assume that market surveillance will happen.
And that really brings us to the final, most important question. You have poured your time, your money, and your innovation into making a fantastic product. But is your compliance strategy ready to match that effort? Because getting this right isn't just about ticking boxes. It's your ticket to succeeding in one of the most exciting markets on the planet.